Okay, so first of all, the title. The title of this video is not entirely accurate. I was worried about putting the actual title of this movie as a title of this video. It was either an act of cowardice or an act of reasonable caution, depending on your opinion. Let me know in the comments what you think. I was worried if I put the actual title of this movie as the title of this video, I'd get red flagged by YouTube or get a warning or something like that. The title is fuck. The title of this movie is fuck. At least I think it is. But actually, if you rent it at the DVD store, they actually have it spelled F***. Which is a little bit strange, right? Because it's like, are we doing this or not? What's going on? It's like, yeah, we're gonna name the documentary Fuck and be all edgy and stuff like that. But of course we can't actually say the actual word, so we're gonna put a star there so nobody will be offended. I mean, to be fair, I suspect, I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect this is some sort of compromise with reality that the director had to make, because I think given the current obscenity laws, you probably couldn't even display the movie if it was titled Fuck. So they had to put the star there on the DVD case so that it could be legally displayed in the DVD store and people could actually rent it. Which just kind of highlights how ridiculous this whole thing is, which is the whole point of this documentary. If you go online, like if you check the IMDb page for this or the Wikipedia page for this, they say that the title of the movie actually is Fuck, and then the cover jacket is F***. I mean, that whole, I've always thought that was the stupidest thing. The act of omitting letters and swear words as if that makes them any more printable. That's just the silliest thing. Everybody knows what that word is anyways. So why do this charade where you're not printing all the letters? One of many silly things when we get into this whole debate about the ridiculous cultural taboos surrounding this word. Right. This documentary came out in 2005 and is about the cultural taboos and the cultural wars surrounding this word and really how silly it is. I absolutely agree with the director 100%. I think it is so silly. That being said, though, I don't really like this documentary. Parts of it were okay, but I thought most of it was just filler where the director didn't have anything useful to say. If you want to stop the video now, that's pretty much my review in a nutshell. The expanded version, though, I'm going to go into some background giving kind of my own personal views on the word fuck and why I think these cultural taboos are ridiculous. And then I'm going to go into more detail about the movie. But essentially, yeah, you could stop the video here if you want. My opinion in a nutshell is what I just said. Right, so my own personal views on this, and I'm going to give some personal background here. I grew up in a religious community, Grand Rapids, Michigan, which I think is famous for having more churches per capita than any other city in the U.S. Famous for its Dutch Protestant community, Dutch Calvinist community, which I grew up in, attending Dutch Calvinist schools as a youngster. And so it was a very conservative religious community, and I remember how the extreme prohibition surrounding this word, like, it was viewed in moral terms, which in religious terms meaning it was viewed as a sin. Like if you said this word, it was some sort of sin against God. It was a breaking of the moral code. So I mean, I remember being taught at a young age that, well, not so young, because when you're really young, you're just naive and innocent. But you know, around 5th grade, 6th grade, when we started to find out about these words, I know we were a bit sheltered. Teachers saying to us, you know, you shouldn't be saying these words. It's not right. I mean, it was. I'm not. It was taught as something that God doesn't want you to be doing, and for whatever reason, the word fuck was like the worst thing you could possibly say. I mean, you shouldn't say shit, you shouldn't say damn, you shouldn't say hell. But all of these were kind of like, you know, a mild scolding. But if you said fuck, then you were in real trouble. Yeah. And this was a while ago. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And I think maybe the taboos are a little bit less strict now than they were back then, but this was, I think, largely the cultural attitude. I mean, the worst thing you could possibly say was the F word. People reacted against that very strongly. And it's still even reflected in a number of our laws about printing obscenities and the movie rating system, right? I think you can say the word fuck once and it's PG-13. If you say it twice, that's automatically an R rating, like regardless of anything else in the movie. If the fuck is in there more than once, it's an R rating. So it's even codified into law, this extreme reaction people have against this word. But I do also remember kind of round about the time I was 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, my classmates started saying it all the time. I mean, it was a Christian school, but, you know, kids, right? And I think the fact that it was such an extreme taboo just made it all the more attractive to kids. Now, I was a fairly good kid. I wasn't rebellious. At least I wasn't rebellious until a little bit later. So I didn't actually say it myself, but I remember kind of, you know, standing in line waiting for the bus. And you know how kids swear, right? The first time they're just trying it on a little bit and they overemphasize it, like, what the fuck is going on here? And they want everyone to hear that they're swearing. So at first it was just really cringy kind of listening to these, you know, 13, 14-year-old kids try it on. But then they got more comfortable with it, and I just started to hear it everywhere. Waiting for the bus, on the bus, at break time at school, in the school locker room, you know, sports practice, just hearing it constantly. And this was the first thing that maybe showed me maybe the disconnect, or how silly this all was the complete disconnect between how common this word was and how taboo it was. I mean, I remember getting into these arguments with my parents. We weren't really allowed to watch our movies, but around the time I was 15 or 16, my parents started loosening up on this a little bit with some movies. So sometimes we could rent an R movie. But if there was too much swearing, like if the word fuck was coming up a lot, my parents would turn off the movie. And I remember arguing with them, and I'm saying, like, you know, I hear this word, I don't know how many hundreds of times a day at school. So, like, why can't I watch it in the movie? Like, I already know what the word is. I've already heard it so many times. I just couldn't understand why this word was so common and yet at the same time so taboo. Like what's going on here? Why can we not have it in movies, but we can have it everywhere you go once you're out in real life? I mean, if you take the bus anywhere in any city, you're going to hear this word a lot. So that just seems silly to me. And then, you know, the more I thought about it, it also seemed like there wasn't a consistent moral reason why this was wrong. I mean, if you go to the Bible, or if the common interpretation of the Bible is that you shouldn't take God's name in vain. So, like, fair enough. Like, you shouldn't say, like, Jesus Christ as an exclamation, or you shouldn't say, like, oh my God, if you're a Christian. And maybe, arguably, you can extend that to other swear words that have a religious connotation to them. Yeah, like, you shouldn't say hell, or you shouldn't say damn, because damn has a religious connotation, arguably. But then, what is the problem with words like shit or fuck? I mean, they're vulgar, but what's the moral reason you can't say these from a Christian perspective? Like, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the Bible. Excuse me. I used to get into this debate with my friends and teachers about the time I was 16, 17, and, you know, beginning to get that rebellious streak in me. There were a couple of verses that I got pointed to where the Bible talks about swearing. But my interpretation of this was, because swear in English can mean a number of different things, right? It can mean like swear, like to say a dirty word. But it can also mean like swear, like to promise or to take an oath. And so like the verses in the Bible would be like, you should not swear by anything in heaven and earth. And I said, but this is swearing as in like taking an oath, like, like I swear on my mother's grave, blah, 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 right? Like that's the meaning of swear when it's being used in these contexts. I don't know, if somebody knows like what the nuance of the original ancient Greek in the New Testament is, let me know, but that was certainly my impression. I could not find any reason in the Bible why there was a prohibition on saying vulgar words. I mean, of course, the English language wasn't even around when the Bible was being written, right? So there was no way that there was going to be a prohibition against specific English words. Moreover, it just didn't make any sense. I mean, for a word like fuck, the literal meaning of this is to have sex, right? But you could say like he had sexual intercourse with her, and it would be perfectly appropriate and not taboo, but you could say he fucked her, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, what did you just say, right? I mean, but the meaning is exactly the same. Even when you go to the literal meaning of the word, it's not that bad. Now, some people argued that the origin of the word has to do with a sort of very forceful sex that might have had connotations on rape. I've looked this up, and this is controversial. Nobody seems to agree on this. Even if this was the original meaning of the word, English words change meaning all the time. Like the word villain used to mean like a farm laborer. The word naughty used to mean worth nothing. Like, you should not go back to like the meaning, what the word meant like 500 years ago. I mean, if you're going to start doing that, then the language is just going to completely fall apart. What it means today is pretty much just another word to have sex when it's being used literally. Most of the time, it's completely meaningless. Like if you say this is fucking ridiculous, then there's nothing to do with sex in there anyways. The word is just being used as an intensifier or as an interjection, or it just completely removed of any literal meaning whatsoever. So where this extreme taboo comes from is not at all evident. And it just, the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to me that it was ridiculous to assign any sort of moral quality to phonemic sounds. I mean, what is the word fuck really? When it doesn't have, it's stripped of its literal meaning most of the time. It's just the words the phonemes fa, and ka put together as fuck. And to believe that this has any inherent moral quality, that God cares at all what phonemes you are using to express yourself. Round about the time I got to 17, 18, where I was beginning to think for myself and beginning to push back against my upbringing, I thought, this is just ridiculous. And what really got me was how ridiculous it was versus how much emphasis was put on it. I mean, coming back to my upbringing again, school teachers and church leaders were just so concerned about people not using these words and kids getting disciplined for using these words and stuff like that. And this is, it sounds silly in retrospect, but this is something that really did cause me to break with my upbringing and saying these people do not have their heads screwed on right. I mean, all the things that are going wrong with the world or going wrong with the country. And this is where they're focusing their energy on, is creating moral prohibitions around the phonemic utterances that people create. Like how, the particular sound that gets shaped by the airflow coming out of your mouth. So, sorry. rant over. All that is to say, based on my background and based on the experiences I come through, having spent a lot of time in my youth debating this very subject with my school teachers and religious leaders and people in my youth group, I am completely on board with the premise of this film. And then the premise of this film is that, yeah, the culture wars, or the whole cultural taboo around the word fuck is completely ridiculous. That being said, I was disappointed in the documentary. It's a 90-minute film, and in this 90-minute film, there's very little hard information. I mean, it's really even hard to properly call it a documentary. The whole thing is almost entirely talking heads. They do get a couple linguists on, but for the most part, all the people they interview are celebrities. And most of them are of dubious qualification. I mean, there's Sam Donaldson, who's, I guess he's respected, but I mean, what does he know really? And then many of the other celebrities, Ice-T, Drew Carey, Kevin Smith, Alanis Morissette, seem to be featured in this documentary just because they say the word fuck a lot. So, okay, I mean, fair enough, they say the word a lot, but that doesn't make them an expert on it, or mean their opinions on the word are really... It doesn't mean their opinions are in any way interesting when it comes to talking about the taboos on this word. And then they interview porn stars for this documentary. And, I mean, the best I can figure out is porn stars are famous for doing the actual fucking. So the director thought, okay, we'll include them as well. But it's really a stretch. I mean, for one thing, the interesting thing about the word fuck is not its literal meaning. I mean, we've got tons of words in the English language that mean to have sex. The interesting thing about the word fuck is the extreme taboo that is out of all disproportion to its literal meaning. That's the interesting thing about that word. So, yeah, the porn stars on here, they don't have anything interesting to contribute. There are a handful of good points made in the discussion, but mostly it's just hot air, people saying meaningless stuff. And then even worse, there's a lot of man on the street interviews. Now, whenever you're watching a documentary and they keep throwing in man on the street interviews, that's just an indication that they don't have enough material to fill up the time. I mean, I know what the man on the street thinks. And you know, this is not like an obscure topic. This is a word everybody knows about. So why are we going to the man on the streets? Just get the linguist on here and give me the linguistic analysis here. They do go into the origins of the history of this word. And this is the kind of thing that would have been really interesting 30 years ago when I was a kid. And before the internet, really, before online dictionaries and Wikipedia and all this kind of stuff. Because, you know, I mean, I remember as a kid on the playground, nobody knew why this word was so taboo. I mean, we knew it was taboo, but we didn't know why. And nobody knew where it had come from. And maybe you remember this if you're the same age as me. All these urban legends on the playground about where this word came from, right? That there were acronyms like, does it stand for fornication under the consent of the king, or for unlawful carnal knowledge, right? All these urban rumors surrounding the origins of this word. But all that was before Wikipedia. I mean, I satisfied my curiosity as to the history of this word and its origins long ago by just Googling it and looking it up on Wikipedia. And I suspect everyone has at this point, right? Everyone's just gone to the internet to find out what the history of this word is. So that makes this documentary kind of pointless, really. I mean, they go through, they do the man on the street interviews again. They ask the men on the street, what's the history of this word? And then the linguist comes in and they set it straight. And all of this would have been much more interesting 30 years ago. There's some brief historical tidbits about the word fuck in the 20th century, but it's very patchy. I mean, it's just random facts. It's not really a coherent story. It's obvious that whoever put this movie together did very little research. They mention that the word fuck has been around back as far as anyone can trace, but it only really achieved its infamy in the 20th century, which is interesting. I mean, why? Well, the film doesn't really tell you why. It mentions the 2 world wars as the reason why this word gained in popularity, but that's not really an explanation. I mean, why this word? I mean, out of all the words in the English language, I mean, there are so many. People talk about the 7 dirty words, but like there are so many slang or off-color words in the English language, especially kind of going back to the 19th century and the Old West and all the epithets that they used to use back in those days. Well, out of all of those, why did fuck become the big one that had such the huge taboos on it? We get some other brief, interesting historical tidbits, which are interesting as far as it goes. They talk about the Supreme Court ruling on the use of the word fuck in anti-war protests. Talk about the first time fuck was said on the moon. First time it was used in a major motion picture, which, by the way, was 1970 MASH. But it's really just skimming the surface here. It really just feels like random facts that are thrown together. Now, the film does try and foster some debate here. It gets some of the advocates of public decency or the religious right on to argue why we shouldn't be saying the word fuck or why those taboos are justified. People like Pat Boone, Miss Manners, Alan Keyes, and an assortment of right-wing radio talk show hosts. But they are skewered in the editing process. In other words, they'll say something and then the film will just juxtapose it with a different image, or it'll just kind of cut it so that it's looking ridiculous with what they're saying. And as much as I agree with the director, I mean, I think what they are saying is ridiculous. I mean, this is just unfair. Because just let them say what they have to say and let their argument stand or fall on its own. I mean, really what they're saying is not convincing anyways. So you don't need to edit it to make them look more ridiculous than they already are. And plus, these right-wing pundits love to complain about media bias. So, I mean, what they're going to do now is they're going to go back on their right-wing talk shows and they're going to say, well, look, we came to do this documentary. We gave up our time and made ourselves available to this director. And then he deliberately edited us to make us look ridiculous. You can't trust this crazy liberal media. And for once, they will actually be right. I mean, they'll actually have a point on their side. So why? It was just stupid and underhanded to skewer them in the editing process. Just let them say their talking point and leave it at that. But aside from that, the film just throws in a lot of gratuitous scenes of sex. And okay, fine, there's a connection between the act of fucking and the word fuck. Although like I said before, the literal meaning of the word fuck is not the most interesting part about the culture wars behind the word. But all these scenes of sex in this documentary essentially mean that nobody on the religious right is going to watch this. Or if they do watch it, they're just going to shut it off, right? So like there's no hope of me going back to my old school teachers or my old people, the people I used to know in youth group, and saying, remember that debate we used to have about the word fuck? Well, watch this documentary. I think it makes a lot of really good points. I mean, I can't possibly say that to them now because of all the scenes of gratuitous sex that they put in the documentary. So it means that anyone who's going to watch this documentary is somebody who is already... It essentially undercuts this documentary as any tool to persuade or have any impact on the public debate or the culture wars. The director is not interested in affecting the debate. He's interested in just preaching to people who already agree with him. Okay, all that being said, the film is not without its good points. It does do a good job of showing the hypocrisy of Washington, D.C. politicians. I mean, remember Dick Cheney, who said, "Go fuck yourself," on the Senate floor, and then had the nerve to appeal to the religious right, the same people who are advocating for this censorship, and the fact that they completely didn't make an issue out of it. And it does a good job of pointing out that the increased clampdown by the FCC on the word fuck. And by the way, the FCC is a completely undemocratic, unelected body. Is once again intensifying, or was once again intensifying back in 2005 when they made this movie. But, you know, I found a reviewer online, and I forget his name, but I'm going to steal a quote from him. He said, all of Anderson's the directors, all of Anderson's jumpy editing fails to cover up the fact that he really only has 30 good minutes of material here. And that's true. I mean, it's not that there aren't good points made in this movie, but there's only about 30 minutes of good material here. The rest is just pointless filler in a 90-minute movie. The high points of this film are when they show you footage from other films. Like they show you some footage of Lenny Bruce talking about him getting in trouble for using this word. And I thought, oh yeah, that's really interesting. I want to see more of Lenny Bruce. But then they cut away. Same thing with South Park, George Carlin. It's one of those documentaries where you're constantly being shown glimpses of things that are more interesting. And you're like, oh, I want to watch that instead of the rest of this documentary. That being said, again, there is some interesting stuff here. There's a short animated segment which talks about the grammar of the word fuck and what a versatile word it is. Shortly after watching this movie, and I rented this for the first time back in 2008, my coworkers were talking about this animated scene which they had seen on YouTube. I was searching for it just now and I couldn't find it again, but at least for a time that a short animated clip had made it onto YouTube. I think I got the impression that that clip was produced for this documentary, although I don't know. Maybe that was an animated clip that existed elsewhere and they just incorporated it into this documentary like some of the other footage they were borrowing. But that was interesting, you know. It talked about all the different forms of fuck, all the different variants, and used as an adjective, as a noun, a verb, how it can be transitive and intransitive. Although I think they may have made a little bit too big of a deal out of it. There's a handful of things that the word fuck can do that no other word can do, like being used in the middle of another word. But most words in English have a lot of versatility. I mean, many verbs in English have both transitive and intransitive meanings. Yeah. One last point, and this is maybe only of interest to me, but I rented this movie when I was in Japan. Meaning I was in the video store in Japan, in the video rental store, and saw this movie, and I thought, interesting that this would be in Japan. And it made me reflect on something that, not for the first time, but thinking about the Japanese view on taboo words. Now, the impression I got living in Japan, and if I'm wrong on this, somebody let me know, but the impression I got living in Japan is that they had words that were rude in certain situations, but they did not have any words that had moral quality to them. I'll give a brief example. One of the Japanese words for shit is kuso. And so, like, you know, it's kind of a vulgar word. But I remember I was teaching at the Japanese public schools, and I was watching the kids interact, and they would say this word all the time, and the teachers didn't seem to care at all. Meaning that, or at least my interpretation of that was, this word did not have moral quality, the way like my school teachers would have said, you know, don't say that, that's a sin to say that. The Japanese school teachers would just kind of instruct the children, it's polite in these situations, it's impolite in these situations. There didn't seem